Wait for it. Here it comes. Okay. I said I would say a few words for you guys about poetry. And so this is part of the lecture that I would have given you had we not lost all those days to snow. The title of this PowerPoint is Measure for Measure, which is kind of hilarious because that is the title of a Shakespeare play. And here we are, deep into Shakespeare. And the discussion is about internal versus external structures and the poetic line. Let's move forward. So this is about form and formlessness, right? Um, Form as in formal poetry. And we're going to be talking about what we mean when we talk about formal poetry. And then the sort of formlessness of free verse. So this is a before and after story. Before free verse and after free verse. So for thousands of years, there was only one way to write poetry, and it looked something like this. This is The Highwayman. And this is a page from, a book of poetry that I had, that was one of my childhood books, one of my favorite books. And this poem was one of my favorite poems when I was a young girl. Yeah, so there was only one way to write poetry, and that was to write it formally. So there's a lot going on with this poem, right? So we look at it and we see the shape that it makes on the page, the sort of regularity of the shapes on its page, on the page. We see rhyme, right? There's end rhymes here, right? Oops, sorry. We see end rhymes, and lots of stuff like that. So, but this is a ballad, right? It's a typical ballad subject matter. Ballads are usually about, wars or tragic love stories or, terrible natural disasters, always people in danger, desperate circumstances, and the fight to survive, right? But ballads are pretty simple. They're written in simple four-line stanzas with an A-B rhyme scheme, right? And they have a very simple four-beat line. I mean, when you think of the ballad, it's also called hymn ballad meter because hymns are written in ballad meter. So if you think of Amazing Grace, then you've got the general idea. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now am found. Was blind, but now I see. So each one of those lines had four beats to it, right? So this is not like that. Highwayman goes. The wind was a torrent of darkness among the gusty trees. The moon was a ghostly galleon tossed upon cloudy seas. The road was a ribbon of moonlight over the purple moor, and the highwayman came riding, riding, riding. The highwayman came riding up to the old inn door. So this is what we would call a literary ballad, someone who is a much more skillful writer, taking the form of the common people and zhuzhing it up a little bit. So we don't have a simple four-line stanza with an A-B rhyme scheme. These stanzas are 6 lines, and the rhyme scheme is A-A-B, C-C-B. It's not a simple four-beat line, not, amazing grace, how sweet the sound, nothing like that. The poem alternates between triple and double rhythms to create a feeling of riding, the highwayman riding over the moors. So the basic form of all English language poetry, written from the Renaissance through the 19th century, is what we called accentual syllabic meter. That is to say, verse that is metered. And another word for metered is rhythmical. So rhythmical verse in which the rhythms are defined by a combination of the number of beats in the line. These are also called accents. When I'm slapping my hand like this to Amazing Grace, right? I'm sounding out the beats in the line. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me, right? That's where the accents fall, right? So metered or rhythmical verse in which the rhythms are defined by a combination of the number of beats in the words chosen, your diction, and the number of syllables in a line. It sounds really complicated, but it's really not. Not so much. So that is all verse written in the English language before before the turn of the 20th century. It looked something like this, was laid out on a page, something like this, had recognizable rhyme and beats like this. And then this guy came along, Walt Whitman. Walt Whitman with what he liked to call his barbaric yawp. Speaking in the language of the people, speaking in the voice of the people, speaking as an American, as he called himself, one of the roughs. So look at the way Whitman's poem sprawls out on the page. I celebrate myself and sing myself, and what I assume you shall assume. For every atom belonging to me as good belongs to you. I loaf and invite my soul. I lean and loaf at my ease, observing a spear of summer grass. My tongue, every atom of my blood, formed from this soil, this air, born here of parents, born here from parents the same, and their parents the same. I, now 37 years old, in perfect health, begin, hoping to cease not till death. And actually, he didn't. He ceased not until death. He continued rewriting the book, Leaves of Grass, revising, adding sections, adding, uh, uh, excursions into, into the Civil War, into what he called democratic vistas, what America offered the world. He continued that until he died. But look at his poem and the way it kind of moves across the page. Not regularly, right? So what inspires Whitman is the Bible. So like the rolling sonorous phrases in the Psalms, that is what he's trying to bring to his poetry. And while there is rhyme in it, it's kind of accidental rhyme. It's rhyme that's internal to the line as opposed to rhyme that is, that is appearing at the end of every line. So yes, Whitman becomes America's world poet. And that means a poet that the whole world is sort of adopted as someone that they're interested in. And this is along with Homer, um, Virgil, Dante, Shakespeare, uh, and Walt Whitman. He's the poet adopted by the rest of the world, admired by the rest of the world long before he was accepted here. Why is that? No. Uh, the rest of the world was thrilled by Whitman's artistic innovations, the things that he was doing in poetry that had not been done in poetry with any success before. But also, Whitman was open about sex and desire in ways that made his American public uncomfortable. He embraced working class people and humble occupations in ways that made the elites who loved poetry in America uncomfortable. And most startlingly, he abandoned the rhyme and meter that most people considered that you needed to master to be considered a good poet. And that made people in America uncomfortable. At the same time, artists in England like Alfred Lord Tennyson, Algernon Swinburne, Oscar Wilde were wildly admiring. Many French artists were wildly admiring. And then gradually, the Americans came along for the ride too. So yeah, so we're looking at the time. First, there was before free verse and after free verse. Before free verse, let's talk about this. The opposite of free verse is fixed verse, right? And that means it's got a fixed rhyme scheme or a fixed form, something like that. So what does the idea of structure in the age of fixed verse look like? Well, it's pretty simple, right? It's rhyme. It's a matter of rhyme. It's a matter of rhythm or meter, as we use. That's the word we use to mean rhythm. And it's also a matter of poetic form. So let's explore that a little bit more deeply. This is, when I talk about the grammar of literature, this is what I mean. These are the basic building blocks. Everything that we do in literature is built on this foundation. So let's talk about rhyme in poetry. Rhyme is actually the most intuitively easy to understand of these formal structures, but it's unexpectedly complex, right? You probably think rhyme is simple. No, not so much. So a basic rhyme, perfect rhyme, masculine rhyme, you can tell that these things were, invented in an age where sexism in language was, casual and accepted. Masculine rhyme, which is also called perfect rhyme, is when you end in a word. I'm sorry, I'm looking for some poems to help you guys out. Masculine rhyme is when the poem ends in a stressed vowel sound and a consonant. So, for example, I'm going to read you the first line the first couple of lines of John Keats's Ode to a Nightingale. My heart aches, and a drowsy numbness pains my sense, as though of hemlock I had drunk, or emptied some dull opiate to the drains. 1 minute passed, and Lethe-wards I had sunk. So we have pains, drains, drunk, sunk, all, one word rhymes, right? One syllable, a strong vowel sound followed by a consonant sound. And so bang, that's considered perfect. But let's go backwards. Feminine rhyme, also called light rhyme, which is the repetition of a two-syllable word. The first syllable stressed and the final syllable unstressed, like steeple, people. Okay, this needs to be distinguished from a rhyme like admire, retire, since the final symbol, even though it's a two-syllable word, the final syllable is stressed. So this is a type of masculine rhyme. Let's go back to the Highwaymen, though, to see, an example of feminine rhyme. Oops, hit the wrong one. The Highwaymen. Okay, here we go. He'd a French cocked hat on his forehead, a bunch of lace at his chin, a coat of the claret velvet, and breeches of brown doe skin. So chin, doe skin are masculine rhymes, but they fitted with never a wrinkle, and his boots were up to the thigh, and he rode with a jeweled twinkle, his pistol butts a twinkle, his rapier hilt a twinkle under the jeweled sky. So here we have the light rhyme, the feminine rhyme, the two-syllable rhymes, and we see how that has a somewhat different effect. Let's go back to the other examples of rhyme. Okay. Triple rhyme, curious, furious, slant, have partial rhymes. Sometimes words don't all the way rhyme, like good and mud. And then there are rhymes that are visual, not auditory. Prove and love, they look the same, but they're not pronounced the same. Slaughter and laughter, they look the same, but they're not the same, right? And here's a note, I rhymes have been created for the most part by shifts in English language pronunciation since the Renaissance. But contemporary poets keep embracing the effects because they think they're cool. So that's rhyme. That's the first of the elements, the most intuitive, but unexpectedly complex. Then poetic form. Well, that's easy peasy too. These are all fixed forms of poetry, meaning that uh, they have a set of fixed conventions that are always used. The sonnet, of course, is the most obvious of the examples. It is always 14 lines, and there are only two possible rhyme schemes and division schemes that are used. One is Shakespearean, which and one is what they call Petrarchan. 8 lines and 6 lines in one with a particular rhyme scheme, or 3 stanzas, 4 lines each, ending with a couplet of 2 lines, right? Limerick is a 5-line poem. Haiku is a 3-line poem. All of these, ballad, 4-line poem, etc., etc. Sorry, keeps moving backwards. These are the so-called fixed forms, right? Easy peasy. Not just entire poems, but also stanzas can have fixed forms. Couplets, 2 consecutive lines of verse, usually rhyming. Tercets, a 3-line stanza. A 3-line stanza can either be a whole form in the case of a haiku, or it can contribute to a larger poem that is all in 3-line stanzas. For example, terzerima. Quatrain, 4-line stanzas. Quintain, 5-line stanzas, as we see in the limerick and the tanka. Sestet, 6-line stanzas, as we see in the sestina. See that root, sestet, sestina? Or the concluding portion of a Petrarchan sonnet is also 6 lines. Septet, a 7-line stanza. This is characteristic of rhyme royal. This is Chaucer's rhyme scheme, and it's often used for narrative poetry, for poetry that tells stories. The octave, an 8-line stanza, which is characteristic of the first half of a Petrarchan stanza sonnet, or the ottava rima, an 8-line poem, a poem with an 8-line stanza that has an A, B, A, B, B, C, C rhyme scheme. So all those are fairly easy to recognize, but meter, now that's a hard concept to grasp. So I'm just going to show you the dictionary definition right here. The rhythm of a piece of poetry determined by the number and length of beat in a line. Meter also is, we use it in talking about music, the basic pulse and rhythm of a piece of music. So yeah. And that's important, right? Because meter is how we make words dance. We create rhythms that make words dance. Now, we call this process of analyzing poems for their formal structure scansion. But you could also think of it as scoring, like the way that a piece of music is scored indicates where the accents are, where the stresses fall, where the beats and the offbeats fall. That's a good way of thinking about it. Beats and offbeats. You could think of it as scoring. The action of scanning a line of verse to determine its rhythm. And here are the connotations. The one that we are most interested in is, of course, number 3. Analyzing the meter of a line of verse by reading with the emphasis on rhythm or by examining the pattern of feet or syllables. What do I mean when I talk about the pattern of feet or syllables? Okay. Well, first of all, let's look at the symbols that we use, right? Oops, sorry. First of all, these are feet. We analyze the line to determine the number of feet. A line that has a monometer only has 1 foot. That means either 2 or 3 syllables. A line that's dimeter or dimeter has 2 feet. So that's about possibly 4 syllables if they're, if each foot has 2 syllables, or 6 if each foot is a triple rhythm, right? So trimeter, 3 feet, tetrameter, 4 feet, pentameter, 5 feet, hexameter, 6 feet, heptameter, 7 feet, octometer or octometer, 8 feet. Very rare. The commonest is pentameter, a 5-foot line, 10 syllables in a line. Now, so that's what the line looks like. Here are the symbols that we use to interpret or um, to analyze the line. There's the straight up and down line, which is a foot boundary. It's used to separate the feet in a poetic line. This is a little, this is, I call it a wand, a little sort of like diacritical mark, like an accent that's written over an accented symbol. And then you put like a U, a little cup, and that's written over an unaccented symbol. So here are the meters again, 1 foot, 2 foot, 3 foot, 4 foot, etc. And these are the symbols. Now, here's where things get a little more complicated. We have words for all of these things. We also have words for the pattern of accents. I am, short, long, trochee, long, short. Let's see. Two roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both. And be one traveler long I stood, and looked down one as far as I could, to where it bent in the undergrowth. Famous poem from Robert Frost, illustrating the iambic line, short, long, and so on. We also have the triple rhythms down here, anapest and dactyl, very common in Greek and Latin poetry, less and in Romance poetry, much less common in English. So here's what it looks like. This is a poem by Annie Finch, a poet to whom I'm deeply indebted for her common sense explanations of this stuff. I mean, some people get it. Their minds work that way. And their minds work that way, so they see instantly how the patterns of stresses and unstresses work. But other people, it's a struggle for them to express the idea or to get other people to see. So Let me read it. All the things we hide in water, hoping we won't see them go. Forests growing underwater, press against the ones we know. So this is a poem in which the stresses fall in the first stanza, all on the first syllable. All the things we hide in water, hoping we will see them go. And then she switches in the second stanza. This is what we call, this is what we call trochaic lines, right? Let's go backwards one more time. The trochee, a foot in which the first syllable is stressed, long, and the second syllable is unstressed, short, right? And they might have gone on growing, oops, come back. And they might now breathe above everything I speak of sowing, everything I try to love. A really skilled poet can make the accents fall in such a way that it sounds like normal speech, just more elevated. So, who can tell me what is the number one verse form used in the English language? Can anyone tell me? Pause the video for a second if you want to think about it, because I'm going to give you the answer. This example is from Shakespeare. This is from Shakespeare's Macbeth. It is, and the answer is iambic pentameter. Specifically, in the case of Shakespeare, it's blank verse. Unrhymed iambic pentameter is called blank verse. Now, what is iambic and what is pentameter? Do you remember? Iamb is a type of foot, right? In which the accents fall into the pattern of unstressed, stressed, short, long, tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow, creeps in this petty pace from day to day to the last syllable of recorded time. And all our yesterdays have lighted fools the way to dusty death. Out, out, brief candle. Life's but a walking shadow, a poor player that struts and frets his hour upon the stage, and then is heard no more. It is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. Iambic pentameter. So look at slide 16 to see what an iamb is, and slide 14 to see what pentameter is. And remember blank verse. Iambic pentameter, unrhymed iambic pentameter turns out to be a kind of screen that you can project any story on to. Shakespeare is very deliberate. He uses iambic pentameter, and he also uses street speech, prose. He's very deliberate in which characters speak prose, speak normally, and which characters speak in verse. So I think that he encourages us to do the same, to be deliberate in when we use, regular, ordinary speech, and when we try to transcend that and move into a different, a higher register. So here's some things to remember about all this stuff that I just told you about fixed forms and external poetic structure in the time of fixed forms. Not every line is going to scan identically the same. That would be boring and monotonous to listen to. but there will be a dominant pattern of accents. We combine the dominant pattern with the number of feet in the line to determine the poetic meter. For example, looking at tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow, tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow, right? We've got those strong accents coming in iambic, in an iambic line. But look at the next line. Creeps in this petty pace from day to day. So that has more accents. It has an accent. It starts off with an accent, creeps, right? And then we, next line, to the last syllable of recorded time. Lots of triple, rhythms in that line. And all our yesterdays have lighted fools the way to dusty death. So the predominant pattern is iambic, but we have triple rhythms in there to break things up. And we also have trochees, lines with strong stress at the beginning of the line to break things up, right? So that is how we get to this. Not every line is going to scan exactly the same, because that would be boring and monotonous to listen to. So that's fixed verse, right? But remember this guy. So what happens? What happens? Everything I've been saying applies to the period before free verse. Well, today, almost nobody writes formal poetry anymore, poetry that rhymes and, that has meters. I mean, it's still done. People do it as a challenge. Some people do it for fun. Some people do it naturally, but it's much rarer. And people are much more likely to write poems in free verse rather than in formal, rhymed, metered verse. So what about all those rules that I just spouted off to you? Do they apply? Kinda. They're a kind of ghost, right? They're part of the inheritance of everyone who loves poetry, everyone who writes poetry, because everybody who loves and writes poetry fell in love with poetry that probably was of a different era than their own. For me, it was the Cavalier poets. Gather ye rosebuds while ye may, old father time's await, running. So yeah, that incredible love poetry of the Romantic era. Drink to me only with thine eyes, for thy love is better than wine. You know, that kind of stuff, right? So even though you're writing in unmetered free verse, that is still a ghost inhabiting the house, right? The ghost meter is actually a a characterization that I get from the great modernist poet T.S. Eliot. There's a ghost of meter that's inhabiting every free verse line. And if a poet in Eliot's undertaking, if a poet takes advantage of that ghost, he can make his poetry better. And the great thing about poetry in this era, the era of free verse and meter that's just a ghost. Oops, come back. Oh, sorry. Oh, come back. Okay, got it. So the idea of structure in the age of free verse means that you, the writer, the reader, has to do more work, right? So you have to yourself, since the writer is not necessarily giving you those easy signals, of what the progression of the poem is, because, basically every sonnet progresses in pretty much the same way. And, the same goes for all the other fixed forms. So in the absence of those kinds of signals, you have to do the work. You have to see, does the poem divide into internal parts? For example, are there multiple speakers? Are there different settings? Um, where does it divide? Are the shifts major or minor? Are the shifts like shifts in time? Are they shifts in tone? How does each part build on the one before? How do the parts combine to make a meaningful whole? So what if you don't see parts, right? So there's got to be an organizing principle. There's got to be a way the poem builds and develops, and you need to do that extra work to figure it out. Regardless of organizing principle, you should be asking of the poem, what is the overall image or emotion that the poem leaves you with? This, these will indicate to you the. And the best part is that when you combine all of the stuff that I've been talking about, the internal and the external, the freedom of the free verse, as well as, the wonderful opportunities of combining meter, rhyme, and line position. The result is, well, I say music here, but actually it's rap, right? So this is why I gave you the most deaf poem to look at, because of the sophistication with which the freedom that he's sort of ranging all over the place, and he's telling you a story. He's telling you a story about hip hop and how it fits into Black music history and how it fits into um, um, how it fits into Black history, but he's doing it with these incredible leaps and this incredible use of rhyme, not just end rhyme, but internal rhyme, right? Internal rhyme occurs when the end rhyme rhymes with a word inside the line. Interlaced rhyme, when several end rhymes rhyme with words inside the line that follows, creating this dense musical effect. He uses echo rhyme. He's got slant rhymes chained over the course of stanzas, both at the end of the line and internally, creating an echo effect. This is some of the most sophisticated writing that's being done today. That's right. Just ask Mosto. And there's just one last thing I want to say before I head on, and that's about this idea of line positions. Um, basically, we have uh, end stop rhymes and enjambed lines. And in an end stop line, the sense stops at the end of the line, creating a complete unit of thought. In an enjambed line, the sense spills over to the next line. Um, it's used in metered verse because, if every line stops at the end, it's very boring, right? But, da 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 da, that's boring, right? But it also when it can be used to create a breathless, headlong effect. And I've got one poem that I want to see if I can pull up to show you to illustrate that breathless, headlong effect. So let me make a quick switch and get that up. Okay, this is a poem by Julia Alvarez called Poetry Makes Nothing Happen. And you see, it's this little thing right here. This is called the epigraph, meanings that the poem, the line, you see the poem is in quotation marks, right? And she's got W.H. Auden, which is the name of a very famous poet, here after the dash. And so what she's indicating is that this is a quote from W.H. Auden. In fact, it's from a poem called In Memory of William Butler Yeats. And I think I might have mentioned to you guys that William Butler Yeats is the whole reason that I'm an English professor, but that's a story for another day. Okay, so look at the way this poem does poems, lines that are end stopped, where the sentence stops at the end of the line, versus lines that are jammed, where it creates a sense of flow onto the next line. Poetry makes nothing happen. Listening to a poem on the radio, Mike Holmquist stayed awake on his drive home from Laramie on Interstate 80, tapping his hand to the beat of some lines by Longfellow. While overcome by grief one lonesome night when the bathroom cabinet still held her husband's meds, May Quinn reached out for a book by Yeats instead and fell asleep cradling When You Were Old. Not the poet's best, but still. Poetry made nothing happen, which was good, given what May had in mind. Writing a paper on a Bishop poem, Jenny Klein missed her ride, but arrived home to the cancer news in a better frame of mind. While troops dropped down into Afghanistan in the living room, Naomi Stella clapped to the nursery rhyme her father had turned on. All the king's horses and all the king's men. If only poetry had made nothing happen. If only the president had listened to Auden. Faith Cheney, Lulu Perez, Sunggi Chen. There's a list as long as an epic poem of folks who'll swear a poem has never done a thing for them, except perhaps adjust the sunset view one cloudy afternoon, which made them see themselves or see the world in a different light. Degrees of change so small, only a poem registers them at all. That's why they can be trusted, why poems might still save us from what happens in the world. You see, this poem was written in 2003. This is the year that we, as a nation, invaded Afghanistan. So here she's talking about listening to a poem on the things that don't happen because of poetry. A man did not have a wreck when he was driving home from Laramie on Interstate 80. A woman did not kill herself when she was ravaged by grief over her husband's death, and her meds were still in the night, in the medicine cabinet. Yeah, poetry made nothing happen, which was good given what May had in mind. And then all these other instances where, well, if only the president had listened to Auden and nothing had happened as a result, and we had not gone to war. So yeah, that's a good place to close. And I'm sorry we didn't get to do more poetry.